Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabarty. Today we are going to be talking a lot of basketball. The All-Star break is upon us, so just going to give some sort of final thoughts on the games from this past week before we get into a little bit of, I wouldn't call it a dead time by any means, but not going to have quite as many games ongoing, so going to be doing some reflection on various things from the first half of the regular season. So we are going to today be talking about Doc Rivers and the Milwaukee Bucks falling short once again. We will be talking about Klay Thompson coming off the bench for the Warriors. We'll be talking about the Timberwolves and the big week that they just had before wrapping up the show with some talk about Caitlin Clark actually becoming the all-time leading scorer in women's college basketball. So before we get into everything, just a reminder to like and follow to keep up with everything that I myself do, as well as my other great hosts out there on the GSMC Sports Network. So on that note, getting into our first segment here, talking about the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, last night they suffered just about the worst possible loss that they could have. They were upset by the Grizzlies 113-110. And if you are just sort of getting into the NBA this year as football is just wrapped up, the Grizzlies are not the 2-seed team from last season. They have been dealing with tons of injuries and even a little bit of suspension as well, but they've been a little bit of a hospital squad for the past couple weeks, and I have been on the show talking about how much I enjoy watching them play actually, because they keep games close, they play extremely hard, and that's because they just have so many guys looking to prove themselves, and that has definitely been the case and is maybe a little bit of the reason for why in a game like yesterday against a Bucks team that has their eyes sort of focused maybe more so on a more significant thing, such as the playoffs and the championship, where they come in and get upended by this young Grizzlies team that started two different guys on 10-day contracts. So kind of crazy to sort of imagine this Bucks team that is supposed to be a contender going in and dropping a game like this. But you know what? This is, again, and it has been for a few weeks now, a difference in effort and discipline a little bit as well when it comes to the Bucks versus these other teams. Now, like I mentioned, the Grizzlies have been competing extremely hard game in and game out for the past month or so when they've been dealing with all these different injuries and, you know, having to sign different guys to 10-day contracts. And they have, while still competing in every game, most games, they got blown out a couple times, but they have been keeping games close more times than not, but they haven't been winning these games. They had lost 9 of their last 10 games coming into last night's matchup against the Bucks, and they are able to pull this one out. Now, it was interesting because Giannis was able to pretty much get to the rim at will whenever he wanted to. The Grizzlies currently only have one center active in their rotation. That is Trey Jemison, who did not start the year with the Grizzlies. He was an undrafted rookie. He was on a 10-day contract with the Washington Wizards earlier this year, and then he signed with the Grizzlies a couple weeks ago on a 10-day contract as they were dealing with all these different injuries, and now he is re-upped to a 2-way contract, at least for the rest of the season, I believe that is. So just one center on the roster. Giannis was just going downhill whenever he wanted to. The Grizzlies didn't have any answers for a lot of that game. Giannis had 35 points on 15 of 17 from the floor. But down the stretch, I mean, it wasn't even the traditional wall that we typically see against Giannis. It was just sort of throwing bodies at him a little bit sporadically, not totally having, the back end rotations under lock, but sort of just saying, hey, you guys are struggling from the perimeter. They were just 11 of 44 from the 3-point line. So it was just bodies on Giannis inside saying, let's make somebody else beat us. And the Bucks weren't able to do so. Like I mentioned, they were 11 of 44 from the 3-point line. They hit 2 less 3-pointers than the Grizzlies, despite shooting 18 more attempts. The Grizzlies were 13 of 26, 50% shooting, which is obviously great. But again, not a tremendous amount of attempts, especially in 2024. But, you have G.G. Jackson, who has been one of my favorite rookies to watch all year. I think that this kid is special. He sort of, didn't get quite the amount of love in the draft process. He had reclassed at one point, and he wasn't quite the top players in this freshman class from the previous season, but he has been phenomenal for them really for the past week or so. But last night he scores 27, I believe it was, him along with Zaire Williams, which was a little bit of a nice surprise. Zaire, another guy who was very highly touted during high school, but never really put it all together. And he was seen to be a little bit of an overdraft at the time when the Grizzlies decided to select him. But, he had a massive dunk down the stretch for the Grizzlies, and he was great. And, again, it's just these young and unproven guys on the Grizzlies against this Bucks team that doesn't really have that same work ethic right now. And Doc Rivers really was getting on them about the lack of understanding on the defensive side of the ball and the lack of hustle. He gave a very interesting quote where he said, we have some guys here and some guys in Cabo. So, they're going into the All-Star break, obviously. And this is typically the time of the year in the NBA season where you get guys and teams sort of falter a little bit just due to the time of the year. You've already played over 50% of your games for the season. You're about to head into this break. You and I both know, if you've, been in school, that last day before going on a summer vacation or a winter break or anything like that just feels like it stretches out and your mind isn't really with it, trying to be 100% focused in on the things that you need to do. And that was a little bit of the case for the Grizzlies last night. But, interesting because we look at this Bucks team and the position that they're currently in, because they were 30-13 when they decided to fire Adrian Griffin. They were the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. But sort of as we've talked about in the past on this show, clearly wins and losses weren't everything for that Bucks front office in terms of why they decided to move off from Griffin. Because if it was just a matter of winning regular season games, the Bucks would have stuck with Griffin through the rest of the season. But instead, they make the change because they feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect in the locker room. The defensive strategy really wasn't getting it done, and they were among the bottom defensive teams in the league. So they end up bringing in Doc Rivers. Since he has taken over, they are 3-7. Their offensive efficiency has dropped from second in the league to 24th. Their defense has statistically gotten better. Nothing, phenomenal by any means. But again, for one of the worst defensive teams in the league under Griffin, they are number 12 in the league since Doc Rivers has taken over. So again, not anything to really write home about, but you've at least seen improvements there on their most glaring weakness, which again is sort of why they brought in Doc Rivers, was to fix the defense, was to fix some of the maturity and effort things, and that hasn't all fully come into shape yet. And we're going into an all-star break. We still have a ton left in the regular season, but I think that the pressure is really building for this team to come out strong in the all-star break. They're still going to be holding practices. They have to figure out what their identity is. I don't worry too much about the offense necessarily alone. You still have Giannis. You still have Dame, which sort of brings in a little bit of a conversation here. Dame has been really struggling over the past month or so. I thought it was kind of crazy when he was given the all-star starter position anyways. Yes, he was on a very successful team. Yes, he's Damian Lillard, a very well-recognized star in this league. And, it was fun for them a while. They were winning games. Their offense was incredible. We all know that in all-star festivities, people don't typically really care about defense, even though the defense hadn't been there for the Bucks. So it was more name recognition and fan vote and all of that stuff. But he has really been struggling over the course of the past month. He's shooting 42 and 34 splits this year. That is the second worst three-point percentage of his career and the third worst overall field goal percentage. So he's been very ineffective from the field. And specifically in the past month, things have not been going well for him. He's shooting 40-29 splits since the start of 2024 across 21 games. So a little bit concerning there. It's interesting because we all sort of just assumed that there was going to be, and myself included in this, assumed there was going to be this elite two-man game between him and Giannis. Yes, it was going to take some time to work out, but ultimately when you combine that great of a shot maker and just about the best rim rolling threat in Giannis, he doesn't even need to come off as a roller. More times than not in his career, he has been the ball handler himself and just going downhill. But the thought of him being able to put these defenses in even tougher positions between the two of them, we just haven't seen it quite yet. Now, it's still, again, we are over 50% of the games through the year, but it takes time to sort of, figure out how the fit works and for them to understand each other. We saw a lot of just sort of a lack of understanding of where to position themselves physically in some of these big moments, and you get the game winner that he had against the Kings, I think it was, and you have these big scoring outputs from both of them, but we haven't really seen a very nuanced game between the two of them. It's a little bit taking turns, and that's not 100% fair. I mean, Dame has never really been the catch and shoot type necessarily. He can do it. He's an incredible shooter, one of the best of his generations, but he's been more of a shot creator himself. And again, just having him with the ball in his hands and having Giannis working out off of him hasn't really come through quite as much as we thought. Now, again, plenty of time before the playoffs. So with this, with their specific two-man game, with Damian Lillard himself, and with Doc Rivers and this Bucks team, I wouldn't write them off yet, but things are very concerning for them as of right now. I don't have the time and all of the data to fully go through the 40-20 rule, but if you have ever heard of it, it's something that Phil Jackson has been a believer of, that for a team to be considered a true contender, they have to win 40 games in the regular season before losing 20. Now, this is for obviously full 82-game seasons. I know we've had the COVID year and we had the shortened year right before that as well. So it's not a perfect rule if it's not 82 games. But it hits at, something like 95% rate or something like that. So that's something I'll come more prepared with next week. But they have now lost 20 games before winning 40. So a little bit interesting there. I think that overall, when you look at this Bucks team right now, it's very easy, especially given Doc Rivers' track record and having these blown 3-1 leads to his name and all of that. He's been in some big moments as well as terms of, the media attention his teams have received coaching for the Sixers last year and the sort of drama that went on with that. You had the Embiid MVP year. You had James Harden, who was a story in himself. He had the Lob City Clippers before when they couldn't come through. And, I think it's very easy to just immediately freak out, say they have no chance. I wouldn't go quite that far, But, I mean, I am definitely very concerned about this. Again, very concerned. I even feel a little weird because I think that the Eastern Conference is pretty open. So, you know, we'll see how they come out of the All-Star break. I know that we can blame coaches for schemes and how they approach getting back in transition, which has been a huge story with the Bucks this year. But I do think at a certain point, you have to put it on the players for not playing hard enough, for not being aware enough defensively, sloppy passes as well that just give other teams easy transition opportunities. And then if you're not even going to play defense there, you're just giving away points. So it has been a pretty rough start for the Bucks this year. Well, that's the thing though, is it wasn't even technically that rough when they were winning games, but that's where I sort of come back to this idea of wins and losses in the regular season were not the priority of the front office there in Milwaukee. Otherwise, they would have stuck it out with Griffin. And, you know, we'll see whether or not that was the right or wrong decision. I don't think that we can make that full judgment now, but I think the whole way that this whole past year has gone in terms of their coaching decisions, letting go of Budenholzer, who I wasn't the biggest fan of myself, but if you know that you're trying to contend like this, moving on from him after a series where your best player doesn't play 50% of the minutes, that is a little bit of maybe strange timing. Maybe there was other stuff going on behind the scenes there, but they're currently paying 3 different head coaches. They're paying Bud still. They are paying Adrian Griffin. Now they're paying Doc Rivers, and there don't really seem to be any answers actively on the table for the Bucks. So plenty of time to turn things around, but I do have definitely a level of concern with this Bucks team. We are going to be taking our first break now. When we come back on the other side, we will be getting into the Warriors and their decision to have Klay Thompson come off of the bench in their win. So we will be getting into all of that. Stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Just finished up talking about the Milwaukee Bucks and their loss last night headed into the All-Star break. We are going to be switching across the league to the Western Conference and one of the premier teams there in the Golden State Warriors, who won a close one last night against the Jazz after almost blowing it and being up big entering that fourth quarter. But they do pull it out. But the main storyline coming out of this game was, of course, Klay Thompson and the Warriors' decision to have him not start and come off the bench. He was replaced by Brandon Podziemski, their rookie, in the starting lineup last night. It's interesting because I was a little surprised. This was the first game that Klay has come off of the bench since his rookie season. Even when he missed 2 entire seasons in 2019-20 and 2021 with those couple injuries. He came back late in the year and still started when he came back. Only played 20 minutes per game in that range for the first handful of games that he was active for, but still started. So this was definitely a new-ish, obviously, old almost, you could say too, but a different role, period, for Klay Thompson that we've seen for the past decade. He first checks in at the 7-minute mark of the first quarter. The Warriors immediately inbound it to him, in which he takes a pull-up mid-range shot, and he missed. I'm like, oh boy. Because obviously there's just been so much attention and pressure surrounding Klay Thompson throughout the course of this season, and how he hasn't been great. But he knocks down his next couple threes. He finishes the first half with 17 points, and it was in the third quarter really where he took over, scoring 18 straight points for the Warriors down that final stretch of the third quarter to finish with 35 points. He was 13 of 22 from the field. He was 7 of 13 from 3. So he put on a very good performance for the most part. Now, and he was doing it on all levels. He was doing it catch and shoot, coming around screens. He made some shots off the dribble for 3, and he was attacking the rim a little bit as well. So, shades of old Klay getting it all done. And this 35 marked the season high for him. So, just about his best performance of the season, which is good. But the Warriors almost gave this game away, and a part of that was the fact that Klay did not have a good fourth quarter at all. The Warriors came into the final quarter up 18 points. Klay played 10 minutes in the quarter. He was 0 for 4 from the field. So, didn't really contribute much at all. We know that he's sort of a minus defender at this point after being one of the most prototypical and effective 3-and-D guys really the league has ever seen. He's just not that guy anymore. The defense for the Warriors is 6 points per 100 possessions better when he's actually off the court. And sometimes those numbers can be a little skewed based off of the team success on defense, what kind of lineups you're playing with, all that different stuff. But Klay has been a starter for a lot of the year, and, they have been struggling more with him on the court than off the court on the defensive side of the ball. A little bit to be expected considering the injuries that he had to deal with those couple years, but I digress. In that fourth quarter, quick side note here, I love Keontae George. I loved his game at Baylor when he was there. I feel like I've given this same sort of speech before on the podcast before, but I think that he is great. He was the 16th overall pick for the Jazz this season, so falls just outside of the lottery. And he's just been so impressive to me. He scored 33 points last night. He had at least 13 or so in the third quarter alone. And he was red hot from behind the three-point line on a night where they needed it because Lauri Markkanen really struggled. He was 9 of 16 from 3, and he had 6 assists. So I think that he is great. He can take over a game. I think that he has that in him. He did have a really tough travel call with about 1:14 left. That was a little bit of a costly turnover for him there. But, he's young. This is a Jazz team that doesn't really have too high of expectations. So these are growing pains through the process. But him and Colin Sexton as well. Sexton had a great game. I think they're a very intriguing backcourt just by the fact that they are still young. Like Colin Sexton, he's still just 25 years old. I know it feels like he's been in the league forever, but, he still has time. I've really liked what he's been able to do since coming into Utah. I mean, you're not going to find a guy in the NBA that plays harder than Colin Sexton does. And he also went off for 30-plus points last night. I was really impressed with the two of these guys, but Klay Thompson, fast forward here a little bit, as the Jazz make this comeback, it gets to be a close game. Klay Thompson misses a three-pointer with 25 seconds left, and the Jazz had the ball back with being down just one and a chance to win the game. Markkanen, who I mentioned, he was really struggling from the field in this game. He misses a three-pointer in the corner. John Collins grabs the offensive rebound, and at this point, he gets tied up, and I'm screaming at the TV, call a timeout, and they don't. Instead, Will Hardy lets them play on a little bit of. I didn't love the decision to not call a timeout. I understand in the heat of the moment there was a lot going on. The ball was in the paint. Not sure maybe whether or not, from Hardy's perspective, whether or not he had possession, but I would have preferred them to call a timeout there. They don't. John Collins throws it away. Also, quick little side note, he is visibly very upset with himself for this turnover. Colin Sexton is just such a class act. He's like trying to pick him up. He's repeatedly chest bumping him. If this might only hit a small few of viewers, but there was a clip a handful of years ago that was circulating. I'm actually going to leave this because I want to fact check before I make this sort of a statement, but he's just always been a phenomenal teammate he's just been a phenomenal teammate. He always gives the energy. He's always there for his teammates when they sort of need that energy boost. They need that little bit of confidence. And I really enjoy watching him play. So, that's that. The Warriors end up getting the ball back after that turnover. Steph Curry is intentionally fouled, and he makes both his free throws. Colin Sexton actually gets another look at an open three to tie the game at the buzzer, but he can't knock down the shot. It was a good look. There's really not much else you could ask for in that situation. So the Warriors end up coming away with this game. I think that between this whole Klay Thompson saga, him coming off the bench here, him with the really bad intentional foul in the game versus the Clippers the other night, and the collapse of that game as a whole almost blowing this game, the Warriors have won 6 of their last 7 games. And I think that that's sort of flown under the radar a little bit, and a little bit, I wouldn't say for good reason. I mean, the Warriors are still kind of what we knew they could be. They're a sleeping giant. They can get themselves together. I mean, I don't understand. The next handful of Warriors games I watch, I am just going to watch their defense. I don't care about their offense because their offense has been phenomenal as of late. I think that another sort of sneaky storyline that's going on with this Warriors team is the fact that Andrew Wiggins, who was obviously so impactful for them during their finals run in 2022, he has not been the same the past couple years, was dealing with some sort of personal matter down the stretch of last season, and really just hasn't looked to be himself since then. But he's playing a lot better, specifically since Draymond has come back, and we've seen this offensive explosion from the Warriors. He's knocking down threes some more. I mean, he was shooting horribly from the three-point line for a good part of this season, and if they can reconcile some of this for him, because by the trade deadline, he was just about a negative asset in terms of, based off of the contract that he has, they probably would have had to attach picks to him to move off of him. And, at that point, it just didn't make sense for them to do so, because this is somebody who they up close saw how important he was for that finals run, specifically on the defensive end. So, again, offense is good. I'm going to be locking in on the defense for this Warriors team because I don't understand how they're quite so bad. I know that Klay isn't the same defender as he used to be, like we already touched on. Wiggins, to that note, is not quite the same player. But, they're relying on guys like Brandon Podziemski, who I think is a pretty good defender. He plays extremely hard. Mentioned on the show yesterday, he leads the NBA in charges drawn. So I don't think it's him. I'm not sure what it is with them. And it's something that I'm definitely concerned about because obviously the offense is always sort of headlined the Warriors dynasty because you have the shot makers and Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson, one of the best shooters of all time. But they were as good as they were because of the defensive end. And I just think that we've seen time and time again, it is so incredibly difficult to win a finals in the NBA if your sole calling card is offense. That's why a team like the Mavericks, I have my doubts with because I don't think that they're good enough on that defensive side of the ball. So, if they want to figure out any sort of a resurrection for this team in the latter half of the year, it's got to be on defense. But as far as this whole Klay Thompson coming off the bench saga, it's interesting because now we go into the All-Star break where we aren't going to have games for another week. So what are the Warriors going to decide to do in terms of Klay Thompson? I think that him coming off the bench is probably the best way to go. I think that Podziemski, he started a handful of games. I didn't think he was phenomenal in the first quarter and that sort of first set of minutes that he got. I don't know if it was potentially because of a little bit of that extra weight that was on it, because before it was for injuries, this was Podziemski starting over Klay Thompson, and it was a national story. So I don't know what it is. Ultimately, Podziemski turned into a fine game, so I've probably already spent too much time on that conversation. But I think that Klay coming off the bench is the better way for them to go down the stretch of the season. Now, you're relying on a guy in Podziemski who was a late first-round pick out of a mid-major school, so there's not a ton of pedigree there, and the Warriors have been a very high pedigree team for the majority of this dynastic run. But I think the way that they've been able to develop him over the course of the year, I think the way that Kuminga has been giving you minutes, Wiggins, if he's turning this corner, it gives you the better two-way ability from 1 through 5, really. And Klay, I think, when he's not providing you the scoring, I don't think that he's providing all that much. Now, IQ is still definitely there. Like, he is one of the best. Role player would be extremely diminishing of what Klay Thompson has been in his career. He's a Hall of Fame player, but he's never been, the number one. He's been, especially because a lot of his game comes from the off ball, especially as of late. So, he's so smart how to navigate around Steph Curry, around Draymond Green, knowing the spacing, where to be, all of that. It's just a matter of whether or not his shot is going to go in. And we've seen some big nights from him, like last night, but we've seen him get cold by that same stretch as well. So it becomes, I think, very difficult to sort of weigh how to use him. And I think that you're going to get more energy and more of a defensive spark from these younger guys who, Klay has just as much to prove, pretty much, honestly, the way that the national spotlight is on him right now. He has just about as much to prove as these young guys do as well. You can see it. And, it's interesting because, I'm in a group chat with some friends, and one of them last night was talking about how he thinks that Klay has been such a baby about this whole benching situation and him not being at the peak of his powers. I don't think that through, the entire season it's been great with him, but I think that as of the past few weeks, he's been a lot more understanding of the reality of the situation, where he started the year, he's saying, I'm a max contract player, I want all the money, all of that. He didn't really understand the idea of him not being in closing minutes and all of that. Recently, he had a quote saying, I am willing to do whatever it takes to stick with the Warriors. That's what I want to do, even if it means a reduced salary for next year, because he is an upcoming free agent. So I think that And we've seen those interactions between him and Steph Curry on the sideline, of Curry trying to pick him up and him being really upset. Again, we talked about it. This is almost human nature. It's very frustrating when you can't be what you know, when you aren't what you know you can be or you have been. And I think that it's a very human issue that he's dealing with. And I think that he's coming more so to terms with it going forward. And that's the thing. I think we get caught up as well very much in who's starting, who's coming off the bench, all of that. I mean, Klay played the majority of the fourth quarter last night. So if he's on a heater, then you can play him. But now there's a little bit less of that expectation. He doesn't have to get maybe quite as in his own head when he isn't in those minutes where the Warriors are running with a hot group that doesn't include him. So very interesting. It's almost a psychological issue as well with this Warriors team and what's going on. What their ceiling is with him starting or coming off the bench, I still don't think it's necessarily championship caliber, but again, their winning 6 of their last 7 games has flown a little bit under the radar, and I think that, with the Jazz selling off some of their options and beating the Jazz last night as well, they really should, unless things go disastrously wrong, they should be just about a shoo-in, I think, for at least the play-in tournament, and, the rest we will see from there. But that is all I have on them right now. We're going to be taking our second break. When we come back, we are going to be talking about a team with a much higher ceiling, in my opinion, the Minnesota Timberwolves. So stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just wrapped up talking about the Warriors and their decision to have Klay Thompson come off of the bench for them. Now we are going to be moving on to the Timberwolves, who I think had just about as big of a week as anybody in the NBA. They just last night blew out the Portland Trail Blazers, and if your thought is, well, that's the Portland Trail Blazers, I agree, but, I think it's not so much just about that game alone. It's about just the way that they ended off this streak going into the All-Star break last night. I mean, they outscored the Timberwolves 44-14 in the first quarter, and after letting them sort of crawl back through the next couple quarters, it became an 8-point game in the third quarter. The Wolves responded with a 9-0 run and just didn't look back from there. So they enter the All-Star break with a 4-game win streak under their belt. All of these games coming on the road for them. And really, it was 2 huge statement wins against the Milwaukee Bucks and the LA Clippers. Again, both of these coming in their arenas. And we saw their defense staggering a little bit. The defense has been the calling card for them for just about all season, but it was sort of staggering a little bit at times. I mean, we saw them blow the game to the Chicago Bulls just last week, but they have been back to sort of themselves, and especially in these big games against the Clippers and the Bucks, able to shut down these opposing offenses. We talked about how the Bucks have been staggering themselves a little bit on the offensive end, but we still know the ceiling that they have. The Wolves were able to shut them down then. And then I think that the holding of the Clippers to just 100 points in their game on Monday was just about as impressive of a performance as you can ask for. The Clippers were trying to run their small ball lineup, against Gobert. If you remember a couple years ago, it was sort of the Clippers who exposed Gobert a little bit with going with these small lineups and trying to pull him out of the paint more and limiting how effective he is. But I think that we've seen himself be able to improve in some of those scenarios to be a little bit, I mean, he's not a lockdown defender on the perimeter, but he can hold his own a lot more this year than he has been able to in the past. And, teams are trying it because they've seen it happen in a big moment in the past. And it's almost giving him a little bit of this extra experience for trying to do so. And, we also sort of talked about this with the Clippers sometime earlier this week. It was when we touched on them, and the fact that with these small ball lineups, they're not quite as effective with Russell Westbrook in them because of the fact that he can't shoot. So you sort of just stick Gobert in these scenarios on the worst shooter on the court and adjust from there. But I think that defensively, he's been able to hold his own a lot more in those instances. He's the front runner for Defensive Player of the Year right now because of his presence, obviously, in the paint. And then I think also when it comes to this small ball conversation, I think that he's also done a better job of being able to take advantage of the smaller matchups on the offensive end, where you saw him, being a little more aggressive. And you don't want him necessarily decision making, but just take what's in front of you. It's offensive rebounds and putbacks. He had a dunk over Kawhi in that game, where don't try and get too cute. Don't try and, go to the post up, but you have the natural size matchup. Just let the offense flow as it does and then capitalize in those moments. And that's what I saw from him in that game against the Clippers that I was a fan of, because we just see this Timberwolves team as a whole really figuring out how to play with one another after a little bit of a messy fit last year in terms of figuring out how to sort of do this whole thing with this too big lineup. And, they're paying Naz Reid, of course. They extended him this offseason, but they're paying this other center as well. And the nucleus of your offense is this young wing in Anthony Edwards, and he's still figuring out sort of his highs and lows. And I just feel like they look a lot more complete as a team. And it's also interesting because when you consider Rudy Gobert, he's going to be a Hall of Fame player, whether you like his play style or not. The defense that he provides, the Defensive Player of the Year awards, he is going to be a Hall of Famer. He, yes, had Donovan Mitchell with him on the Jazz, a very young Donovan Mitchell, and a Jazz team that really wasn't expected to be anything all too spectacular until we saw Mitchell come in, provide the scoring that he could, and the team having the anchor of Gobert in the paint to play defense for them. And, I think that a lot of that Jazz strategy was tailored for Rudy Gobert getting what he wants. He gets a certain designated amount of post touches despite not being a very nuanced offensive player in the post, and defensive schemes were all centered around him. And now you see there's a lot more mouths to feed. You have a couple different offensive players that are more talented than you are for that. Anthony Edwards, of course, Karl Anthony Towns at your own position being a better offensive player. And I mean, Naz Reid, I love Naz Reid. The way that he's able to stretch the floor and what he's able to do. I mean, he's probably a better offensive player than Rudy Gobert is. So I think that it was a little bit of an ego thing as well for Gobert trying to settle into this Timberwolves team off rip. And now we've seen him sort of go through a level of maturity that makes him a better player. It's something that we see with, every single player for the most part in NBA and in sports history, really, is sometimes you have that little bit of an ego check. So that's sort of my notes on Gobert there. The offense is what's really been sticking out to me through this road trip. And again, a little bit of a small sample size, just 5 games, but They were 4-1 on it. They blew the really bad game to the Bulls, where it was their defense that let them down in that one. But they win their last 4 games of the road trip heading into the All-Star break. They scored 124.4 points per game on that road trip. And their offense has been pretty subpar for the year as a whole. I think there's some very interesting clutch numbers when it comes to this offense and whether or not when the game slows down, they have the shot creators, the shot makers, the IQ really to play a smart brand of basketball. I mean, you see Karl Anthony Towns earlier this year getting benched in the clutch with 62 points because he was sort of so caught in his own head in the lack of maturity. And I think maturing is a big part of, both sides of the court for this Timberwolves team, as we just sort of talked about with Gobert as well. But the Timberwolves still are, outside of the top 15 in offensive rating for the season as a whole. In their past 10 games, though, they have a 120.8 offensive rating, which is 5th in the NBA in that span. So, a lot of it has been Anthony Edwards just taking his game to another level. He's been so incredible. I love watching this guy, and he's just a menace for opposing defenses when he's fully locked in like that. He's a menace on defense as well when he is being asked to step up into that role. But last 2 games of this road trip just killed the Blazers, and I thought the composure, obviously you're playing the Trailblazers, so it's not like the level of difficulty is really all there too high, but I thought that specifically the game on Tuesday night, coming off of second day of a back-to-back, coming off of a big emotional win against the Clippers the night prior. If you remember that Clippers game, I mean, it was close at halftime. The Clippers went on a run to close that first half, really make this thing a game, and the Clippers come out in the third quarter and just run the Clippers off the court, where the Wolves put up 40 points in that third quarter, help them carry the lead into and through the rest of the game. And then Tuesday, you have this game against the Trailblazers. Again, we just sort of looked at what happens when you overlook a team with the Milwaukee Bucks that we talked about earlier in the show, overlooking the Grizzlies and end up getting upset. The Wolves, I should say, in this instant, come into Portland where, definitely easy to overlook them. This was a tie game in the fourth quarter, but their offense, again, was the one. I mean, their defense was still good throughout that game as well, but their offense was just a little bit slow to start that one. They explode down the stretch of the game. Nickeil Alexander-Walker was phenomenal for them down the stretch of that game as well. Anthony Edwards finishes with 40 points, giving energy on both sides as well. So I just feel like, the composure that's there, and Anthony Edwards, to that note, has just been so crucial for this team, being able to, he can get a little immature at times talking about the refs. He gets caught up in that as well. There was some interesting quote about him talking about trying to add a left-handed jumper to one-up Michael Jordan and all of that. And, he gets sort of caught up in the fun of the game, but I mean, that's a better thing than disassociating from the game itself and just sort of treating it more so as a hobby than, the actual thing that he's working for. He's extremely competitive, so much so that he's trying to, one up Michael Jordan. It's really fun stuff to see from Anthony Edwards. He is definitely, in my opinion at least, on pace for his first ever All-NBA appearance. So we'll obviously see how that plays out. The Wolves didn't really make all too many moves at the trade deadline. They added Monte Morris as a backup point guard. I like Monte Morris a lot. He wasn't getting much playing time in Detroit, in a team that was trying to get some of their younger players more playing time and more opportunities and all of that. He hasn't played much for Minnesota very much so far, only 15 minutes a game in those 3 games, but maybe they're just trying to work him back into it, considering the lack of workload that he held in Detroit. I mean, this Timberwolves team could definitely benefit from having some more accessible options for their point guards. They were relying on Jordan McLaughlin a lot earlier this year. Shake Milton never really panned out as far as the backup point guard they were hoping that he could be. So they bring in Morris, who I've always, again, liked. I think that he's just steady and reliable. And again, with this team that sometimes is, I wouldn't call them off the rails or anything, but the moment gets a little fast for them and they get very excitable. I think that Morris could find himself sort of sliding into a role where he's more of a calming presence for this team. But, ultimately, the championship doesn't lie on the shoulders of Monte Morris. It is with that starting group. It's with Anthony Edwards. It's with their bigs. Very Mike Conley reliant right now. And Mike Conley is a phenomenal player, but just at his age, it's, it's just something to watch for, especially because I think their other starter in Jaden McDaniels, incredible defender, don't think he's a very good decision maker. So, again, a lot sort of falls on the shoulders of Conley to initiate the offense. And again, their crunch time offense in clutch games hasn't been incredible. So, especially against some of the other really good defenses, it's one thing to do it against a Portland. And, the Clippers aren't even that great of a defense, really, but they were able to escape even getting into that close game because they were playing so fluidly through the third quarter and all of that. They were able to build up a sizable lead that it never got all too contested. But I think that the Timberwolves need to win some of those games first before, we can really call them any sort of favorites. Again, definitely in contention. They are the 1 seed in the Western Conference. They have the second best record in the NBA. But there are still a couple things we probably would like to see from them going forward before we, crown them by any means. But that is all I have on them. So we are going to be taking our final break. When we come back on the other side, we will be talking about a historic night last night with Caitlin Clark. So stick with us. We will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We've talked a lot of NBA through the course of the show today. We are going to be sort of switching off here to a semi-related but different segment, talking about Caitlin Clark, who just last night became the all-time leading scorer in women's Division I basketball. Clark really started coming into the spotlight during Iowa's run last year in the NCAA tournament, the women's tournament that is, her little bump in with Angel Reese as well. And, the thing is with Caitlin Clark, we sort of knew for a good amount of time that she was headed on this trajectory to become the all-time leading scorer. She is putting up legit video game-like numbers that we really haven't seen before. And, I can't say that I'm obviously the number one women's college basketball fan in the world, but if you watch Caitlin Clark and what she does, she is legitimately so talented at the game of basketball. We had a meeting earlier at the GSMC Sports Network as far as, talking through this story and Caitlin Clark herself, and the question was asked, well, should an NBA team be willing to give her a tryout at least? And to my point, I said I think she could play on the Memphis Grizzlies right now legitimately. Yes, maybe there's a level of physicality and a little bit of speed as well, but I'm pretty sure she's taller than Jacob Gilyard, who has been playing significant minutes for them this season. And, she has the shot-making ability. She is absolutely incredible. But my other response to this was the fact that I think she is so impactful for women's sports and giving it the credibility that it needs, that I think she sort of needs to stay within the realm of women's sports. Like, yes, it would definitely sort of transcend society if she was able to play in a men's league and do, even some of the stuff that she's currently pulling off right now at Iowa. But I mean, I think that she is going to be an absolute star. She already is a star. And while there are probably more financial benefits to her, again, this is purely a hypothetical here, but if she were to, make the NBA as a 10th man on probably a, lower end NBA team, I think that she is going to make such an impact on the WNBA. And again, it's not that I've ever been the biggest WNBA guy by any means, but I think that star recognition is a big part of that. That's obviously what draws you and I and most viewers to a certain sport. It's sort of hard to really get in on a sport where you know just about nothing. Familiarity, however you say it, is obviously a big part of that. And I think that Caitlin Clark, the second that she steps foot on a WNBA court, she's going to probably set the record for the most watched regular season WNBA game of all time. And I don't even think that's a bold prediction, really. I think that just about everybody would, I don't want to speak for anybody, but I think that that should sort of be a common understanding, is that we really haven't had a player that has gotten this level of heights of national attention just at the college level. Obviously, there are tons of other WNBA players that have had their moments, and I think that it's great timing too, sort of, with Sabrina Ionescu this weekend is going to be facing off against Steph Curry in the Steph vs. Sabrina challenge, the three-point shooting challenge, that is. And I think that, that's a great moment too. I think that we should sort of be trying to incorporate men's and women's sports together when they can. I'm not saying combine them, but if we can sort of level the playing field in any way and just help show at least these women's leagues that run on their own that they have tons of talent. And again, stars is, I think, the big thing. That's what's going to get you to tune into a sport that you're not heavily invested in. Like, you're going to want to see whether or not, and I forget the woman's name, but the woman, former WNBA player that said that Caitlin Clark, it's going to take her time to adjust to the WNBA. Like, may be very true, but we all are curious to see whether or not that is going to be the case. And I mean, I think it will translate. Just the shot making that she has is ridiculous. I mean, if you haven't seen the clip itself of her breaking the record, it was a fast break, pull up from the logo three, nothing but net. It was crazy. And this is en route to her finishing the game versus Michigan with 49 points and 13 assists. So again, this is a historic thing, obviously, for the individual sport of women's college basketball. That, I mean, we saw last year them have the highest audience ever for a women's tournament game. There was a couple instances of those. I think one of them was LSU Iowa, and it was the national championship as well, I think, where two of the most streamed women's college basketball games in history. And I feel like we're seeing more and more some of these women's college basketball players actually get the national attention. And I know that to some degree there is a level of, you have companies like ESPN and such that are trying to promote the sport for their own ratings and all of that. But the fact that there are actual really talented players that are worth marketing and they can actually draw some sort of attention. Juju Watkins, I think, is the other player, and it's one of those red teams. I want to say it's USC. It's just, it's really impressive to see, and I am sort of excited to see how the future of this goes, because you look at the WNBA, it's not like they have to be stepping on the toes, stealing any sort of viewership from men's sports. They take place during the summer. I think into the fall is maybe when the playoffs take place. Again, I feel like I'm discrediting myself a little bit by the fact that I admittedly have not been the biggest fan, through history, but I want to be. I do want it to be a more compelling thing, and I want the talent that is out there in professional sports to be highlighted. And this is sort of an opportunity, I think, for Clark herself and the league to make that jump, because ESPN is putting all these extra games on national TV and sort of directing our attention towards it, that if it's a good product, it is better for everybody. I know that there's the group of people out there that are just pessimistic and very negative and like to see other people, other things fail, but there is no reason we should be rooting for this to not work out, because Caitlin Clark, again, a star in her own right, and the way that this has all played out for her and for Iowa and for women's college basketball, women's sports, is an incredibly positive thing. And I think that it is awesome that we're going to have a Steph versus Sabrina 3-point shooting contest to, again, just, merge a little bit. We can still appreciate, the differences between men's sport and women's sports, but that shouldn't discredit what either of the two do. And I think it's pretty cool of Sabrina to, take the men's 3-point shooting line, to use the same ball as Steph Curry, like even the playing fields, because no, you're not seeing Ja Morant like dunks in the WNBA, but that doesn't mean that there is a lack of skill, a lack of talent, anything like that. So I guess this is all just sort of a way to say that we should be looking to appreciate greatness. Is something that I always sort of, yes, it's extremely corny, I'm aware of that, but it's something that, I, as a sports fan, as somebody who has a career within sports media, I am looking to celebrate the maximum amount of amazing and awesome things in the sports community. What Caitlin Clark is doing is nothing short of amazing. And again, if you actually watch how she plays basketball, there is such an elite level of skill that sort of transcends all of our typical expectations, maybe from an outside perspective of what this sport actually does have to offer. And it's an incredible thing that we're witnessing. We still have, another another month plus of the season to go here, so she can only continue to add on to this all-time record. And then, probably headed for another record-breaking March Madness, tournament where she will be drawing in viewers just to have people witness this greatness. And I think it's really cool to see. One quick side note, I thought that the Kelsey Plum comments on this whole thing as it was playing out was a little bit strange, and I don't think it was by any means malicious or anything like that, but she had some quotes talking about, like, thank you for taking this away from me. This is something that, was going on during the lowest points of my life, so I'm almost glad to be relieved of it. I'm paraphrasing right now. I don't want to, misspeak or anything. I just thought that it was almost a little bit of a weird way to sort of congratulate her on this, and then she prematurely congratulated her the other day before she actually broke the record. It was just a little bit strange in my point of view, but again, not like it was any sort of a big deal or anything like that. But that is about all I have on this segment and for the show today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. You can catch the full episode on audio platforms as well as the individual segments on YouTube. So check those out. A reminder to like and follow wherever you do. Keep up with us, and we will be back on Monday. So have a great weekend, and we will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that